1979. We're in the office of the Queens District Attorney's Office. The time is 3:20. We're here for an interview of Craig Glassman. My name is Herbert Leifer, Assistant District Attorney. Mike, want to give your name?
Michael Armiente.
Craig?
Okay, Craig Glassman.
And could you put your address and your date of birth on it, please?
42 Pine Street, Yonkers, New York, apartment 6E, May 11th, 1948.
Okay. Craig, we've asked you to come here to our office for purpose of just filling in some information that we require with regard to any involvement that you may have had with David Berkowitz as his neighbor, friend, if it existed, or in any other relationships you had. I do know that you received certain communications from him, and I'd like you to start from the beginning when you first moved into Pine Street, and I believe it was 35 Pine Street at that time.
Correct.
And, well, give us an approximate date when you moved in, if you recall, and continue from there.
That's no problem. All right, it was March 15th, 1977. My wife and I had separated. We were going to be getting a divorce. So I moved out of the apartment, and it just so happened that it was convenient I was in nursing school at the time. It was convenient, so I happened to pick 35 Pine Street. The apartment was nice. It overlooked the Hudson. You know, the rent was all right. So I moved in. From that point on, I really didn't get to know any of the neighbors in the building. And, I just kept to myself because I was busy in school, going back and forth, studying and so on, seeing my own friends. I am a member of the Westchester County Sheriff's Department, the Emergency Force Division. At that time, I was just a deputy. And during that time, it was an incident one night. It was in May, where I had played my television too loud, and I got a phone call. This was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and the phone call, the person on the other end said, "Shut that fucking television off." Okay. And
You're supposed to send some detectives over to the bank?
Yes.
They will be here tomorrow. Sorry.
So at that time, I felt pretty bad. I guess I thought, my television was too loud, and one of the neighbors, he didn't even give me a chance to say, I'm sorry or whatever. So I just really didn't think of anything of it.
What year was that?
Okay, this was 77. It was like 3 months after I moved into the apartment. And, in retrospect, coming to the present and going back, it could only have been David Berkowitz, because the neighbors who lived below me were Puerto Rican, the 2 or 3 neighbors around me were black, and the person whose voice was on there was white. It was obvious. And then, plus when I heard Berkowitz's voice for the first time after we'd arrested him, it kind of, came together.
Now, you were in apartment what?
6E. I lived directly below him.
And David was 70.
70, just above me. All right, the apartments were connected by a fire escape. Okay, we overlooked the Hudson River side of the building. That's west towards New Jersey.
But did you have a listed or unlisted phone at that time?
At that time, if you would have looked in the phone book, my number would have been listed for 130-68 Glenwood Avenue, which is about a block and a half away. Okay, so
When you moved, you took the same number with you?
no, my wife kept that number,
Right.
and I got a new number, which was in information. I mean, if you called information, they could give you that number.
But it wasn't an unlisted number that he could not have found unless he had some source.
No, if he would have looked in the phone book, he would have had to call my wife's house. If he would have called information, he would have gotten my number from information. That's the only way he could have gotten it, because very few people at that time, that I came in contact with, knew that I was separated from my wife, living away in another place. So, there were several people, like the chief of my department, who knew my phone number, and several other people. So, that kind of narrowed it down. So at that point, that was it until June. I had no contact. I've never, all the times that I lived in that building, I never saw David Berkowitz, whether we were in the hall, walking on the stairway, or I was in the garage. We never had contact, at least on a conscious level. I never recognized him because I really never spoke to any of the neighbors. I really didn't, converse really with anybody in the building.
You had an automobile at that time?
Yes.
Did you park it in the building or in a parking lot
It
next
was
to the building?
parked in the indoor garage, the upper level indoor garage.
Okay. And what kind of car did you have at that time?
At that time was a 1972 gold Pontiac Le Mans, 975 RYJ.
Now, was Berkowitz's car in that garage also, or was that parked outside?
Again, I can only tell you what happened after he was arrested from Yonkers PD telling me that he parked on the street. Okay, because he said, Officer Chamberlain, Yonkers PD, told me at times he parked like in the back lot below where we lived, down below, because there's an outdoor parking lot.
Right, I've seen that.
But he mainly parked on the street because you have to pay for the outdoor spaces as well as the indoor spaces. So,
Now, from the time of that phone call, you had no other connection, no other involvement
I was
until...
busy with nursing school and the sheriff's department.
Okay. Okay, and then the next time something happened?
Hold on.
June.
Okay.
Go ahead, turn it off for a second so we can... Continue. Now, you're saying, Craig, that after the phone call, what happened?
Okay, I was, again, like I said before, I was busy with my nursing responsibilities and my duties with the sheriff's department. And at that time, to give a little background, I was having problems with my own department because of, I guess, jealousy, seeing that I had been promoted within the short period of time that I've been with the sheriff's department. It was like 2 years, and I was promoted to corporal. And I had some people who were angry with me over one incident, which kind of lays the groundwork for the reasoning behind later on. So I received a letter on June 13th from, someone unknown. It was a letter threatening my life, saying, "We will murder you, we will kill you." I have made copies of it, so I'll give you a copy. But
Okay,
this is like a photocopy of it. The sheriff's department, before they realized that he sprayed it, didn't take a picture of it, and it started to run. So that was like, the best copy, but I have a copy, like
What do you mean sprayed? What happened?
for prints.
Oh, I see.
And he didn't, I don't know, I guess his problem, he didn't photograph it first and then spray, because
I see.
now, I've seen the letter since, and his hair burned away. The silver nitrate spray.
Do you know who was the author of this? Did you find out?
At that time, no. I immediately called the undersheriff of our department, Mr. Jack O'Brien, and I spoke to him about it. He asked me, the first thing he asked me, have you had any trouble with your neighbors? And I said, hell, I don't even know my neighbors. So he said, well, then, what about other places? You have any enemies? And then I related the incident that went on at the sheriff's department, and he said, well, possibly could be that. So why don't you just let it go? Maybe it's just one isolated letter that somebody was letting off some steam. Let it go. Don't say anything to anybody. This way, maybe, they'll either come forward, seeing that they didn't get a response out of you, and then, you can see that way. I said, okay, fine. So I let it go. But again, this whole period of time, I never met Berkowitz. I never saw him.
Were any prints taken?
They didn't find any prints on the letter, none that were usable anyway. So within the next month, I received a second letter,
Homicide.
which
Yeah.
I have a copy for you here. And this even,
Yeah.
within our framework, made it our theory more viable, because if you notice, it says
I
my
got it.
superior, Sergeant Glassman.
I got it.
At the time, I was a corporal, so we felt, and there's so many terms in there, captain, general, that, this person was within our own department. It was,
Do you recall the dates that you
Hold on.
received either of
Hold
these
on.
letters?
yeah, June
Hello?
13th,
Who's
Was the
this?
first
oh
one?
wait, I'm sorry, June 7th,
Michael
and
Almiante.
July 14th,
Queens District
that's the
Attorney.
second letter.
Yeah.
And that was 1977. Okay.
Who's this?
Okay, so that kind of cemented it, and the undersheriff said, well, let me speak to Chief DiOrio, who's head of Bureau of Criminal Investigation for our department, and we'll open the case on this, and they wanted me to get all the handwritings of all the people in our own department,
D-O-F-L-E-R.
which I did, and
And
3
28.
people's handwriting came pretty close, too, believe it or not. And at that time, they were investigating it at that angle, that it was
Okay.
somebody within our own
All right.
department. So,
Yeah.
at that time, the investigation continued. Again, no, I knew nothing about my upstairs neighbor, anything like that. And it came around to the beginning of August.
Yeah.
Less than a month later, and I graduated nursing school on a Friday night, which was August 5th. My father had flown up from Miami. He stayed overnight with me in my apartment. And that next morning, about 7:30, approximately 7:30, I was awakened. I was laying on the couch closer to the door. So my father was asleep on the bed, and I heard a crackling and popping noise. I could see around the door frame there was a fire. So at that time I woke my father up, called the fire department. At that time I thought the building was on fire.
Hold on a second.
So at that point I heard people outside, and they said, "Don't come out." And I said, "I'm not gonna come out."
Yeah, speak
So
up.
they were started to douse the fire with water from
Yeah.
outside. And they
Oh,
said,
yeah.
"You're not gonna believe this, but the fire's only in front of your door."
Listen,
So I was kind of surprised and taken
is there
back
any way
by
we
it.
can see you tonight?
Under this auspice, the Yonkers Police Department, when the fire department showed up,
This is
they
my
called
comment.
for an
This was
arson
yesterday?
investigator immediately.
Yeah.
And normal procedures to have a team of uniformed officers come up
as
and interview, the
we have
people.
some time.
Do you have an approximate date that happened?
That
Is there-
was August 6th,
If we can work it up one of two ways, whichever.
fire
is convenient
7:30 in
for
the
you.
morning.
You can
Okay.
come to our office around.
So at that time,
5 or 6.
Lieutenant Starkey of the fire
Or
department
we can
responded,
review
as the arson
in Brooklyn
investigator.
sometime around
And in the within they found that it was a flammable liquid that they had somebody had piled garbage, bags, cardboard, and they had placed 22 caliber bullets
George Bird.
in the fire, because you could see on the door they expended. You could hear
You
popping.
have not spoken.
The door, luckily it was
We
metal,
have not spoken.
and only the viewer box on it. You looked at it,
As far
popped
as,
off.
Your interview,
So at that time,
when the incident.
the uniformed officers came up.
See, we're not associated with
And,
the New York City Police Department at all.
He came in and he asked the other people to leave, and he kind of closed the door.
So you will
And
not
he said,
have-
"Can you tell me, have you ever received any threatening letters from anyone?" And I said, "Well, I have. I've received 2, and I showed him who I was and who I was with, and I said, we have it under investigation at this time." And he said, "Well, would you allow me to see one of the letters?" And I said,
Yeah, I can't.
"Well, I guess so. I guess it would be all right." At that time, the sheriff's department had already assigned an investigator who was working on it. And they were just sending stuff to the state police for signature checks, things like that. So Chamberlain, I showed Officer Chamberlain, Yonkers PD,
Of the case.
the second letter, which I gave you there. And the minute he saw Carr's name, he said,
Is there
"Oh my God, this is the guy."
About
And I
5
said, "What do you mean, this is the guy?" He said,
The,
"You're not going to
police
believe
chief's
this,
office.
but the guy who we think set the fire outside the door and sent you this letter is the guy who lives right above you. His name is David Berkowitz." And he wrote it down on a piece of paper, his apartment number, his age, his date of birth, his, height, weight, car, license plate number. And he said,
Okay, give me a call.
this guy, Sam Carr, within this letter, lives right down the hill from you.
Yeah.
And
How you
his
gonna-
daughter is a dispatcher at Yonkers PD.
Okay, take the bell to the
And
van.
if you want to talk to her and find out what's going on with them, he gave me her name and her number and told me to call her.
On the van line, get off. on
So
Queens
he said, "You're not going to believe this, but we feel that this guy might be the son of Sam." And I said, "Really?" And he said,
Okay.
"Yep." And,
When you reach the first,
you know,
when you reach the second line,
I was, really surprised.
Yeah, right.
I couldn't believe it, especially living right above me like
and you
that.
will have passed that
And
big building, the white building.
After, David called the detectives to come in,
But when you
who
get
was
to the
handling
second line,
Carr's
make it
case,
You go down.
and he brought the letters
Halfway
that
down, and you see a
supposedly
parking
somebody
lot
had
to your
sent a
right.
car. And we put them together, and even though none of us
Pull in
were
there.
handwriting experts, you
Okay.
could pretty well see that the letters are written by the same person.
Then you
You
see
know,
a door,
and,
you go through it, and you ask the guard.
They said, "Well, get the person who's in charge of your investigation to contact us." Because that time, Yonkers knew nothing about my goings on because we thought it was within the
They
department.
are,
I was told by the undersheriff not to notify
Yeah.
Yonkers PD of the threatening letter.
AR.
Because he felt it was an
MI.
internal problem. So
EN,
Yonkers wasn't
TI.
notified, that's why they weren't notified. And at that time, that's when Yonkers and the sheriff's
Yeah.
department got together.
okay?
Now, New York City was
Yeah, my
never
number.
notified of
Right.
this.
Let me know as soon as
Because
you can.
Chamberlain said he had called the 109th
Okay, bye.
precinct or something, was in touch with detectives out there.
Mhm.
So, after they scooped up all the crap outside and put it in barrels and whatever they were going to do with it, whether they were going to use it as evidence or what, I don't know. Because they never had prosecuted the case, even though they had direct evidence that, Berkowitz had, done this. Still, again, at that time, none of the letters, were said they were from David Berkowitz, and definitely written by David Berkowitz. This was afterwards that New York City, the handwriting analysts had said that they were all Berkowitz's letters. So at that point, everybody all left, and my department came. They told me, well, matter of fact, they went up to check Berkowitz's department to see if he was home, and he was not home. And matter of fact, Officer Chamberlain told me before he left, they checked the neighborhood to see if his car was there, and it was not there at that time. So my department came. He checked through everything. We knocked on his door later on. Still, there was nobody home in Berkowitz's apartment, and you could not see in from the fire escape because he had nicely put up a blanket on the window so you could not see in. So we checked the roof for a weapon. I had told him what Yonkers had told me about him possibly being a suspect in the Son of Sam, and we checked the roof all over to see maybe there'd be a weapon. Maybe that's where he hid the weapon. Maybe he never kept it in his apartment. He hid it in a loose brick in the elevator shaft or whatever. We found nothing. We went down, we checked my car to see if maybe he rigged something in my car, and that was clean. Then my investigator, David Feliciano, the sheriff's department, told me it's best maybe if you move out to another apartment for the time being until we get this whole thing cleared up, because now the guy means business. If he's going to try and burn you out, he's certainly going to, possibly try and do something else. So, in no way did I ever realize, what did I do to this guy, to do it, other than, that one time with the loud television set. So, I left that night, and my father was still there. He was stunned by this, because I never told him about the threatening letters. So, we went to my uncle's house at 96th Street here in the city. We had dinner, and we got home about 9 o'clock. And I decided to stop by the apartment to get my service revolver and some other things that I'd need for the next day. Because I was going to move into my wife's apartment, because she was away for that weekend. And then I would take care of the animals for her and so on. And so I went to my apartment. I could hear Berkowitz walking around when I was there. But they told me not to take any action against him. Because I was pretty angry. I wanted to see what this guy looked like. And I wanted to go up there and knock on his door and let him know that now I knew what was going on, but they said not to do that. So I got my stuff. We went downstairs. Before we left the building, I said, let me stop and get my mail, because we never got the mail. When I got downstairs to the mailbox, I started to take the letters out, and there were 2 more letters. And then at that time, I realized it was David Berkowitz. And these were the 2 letters, which again I have copies of, that he had sent. And the minute, I didn't open the letters, I immediately called my department. I called Yonkers, and they said, well, we can't do anything. Detective Lorenzo is out of town. He won't be back till tomorrow night. I called my department. They said, well, you know that our fingerprint unit is open. You have to come in Monday morning. This was Saturday night. I said, all right, well, I'll put it in plastic bags and, save it. Well, I held the letter up to the light. The one thing that I could see when I looked through says, I know, Master, that I am doomed, but do not think that I will not tell the authorities of you. True, I am the killer, but Craig, the killings are your commands. And from that point on, I felt that he was the Son of Sam. And when I went in on Monday to bring the letters in with me, I told the investigator, and he told me at that time, we checked Berkowitz out, and we checked his background out. He's not the guy.
And you got the copies of those letters?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, and the dates on these 2 letters were what?
Okay, that was August. Well, they were mailed on the 4th, and I got them on the 6th.
August 6th, 1977, for both of them.
Right, because in the second, in the first, if you see in one of the letters, it says Craig, you'll be punished. In other words, I guess the fire was the punishment or whatever. I guess, I don't know.
Okay.
All right, so again, at that time, that's what in my mind, it kind of related that he was, with seeing that true I am the killer, he was the Son of Sam. Then at that time, I went and slept at my wife's apartment. And the next day, my father was flying back to Miami. We were going out to breakfast. We came home. He didn't want me to drive him to the airport. So I took him over to the limousine on Central Avenue to go to the airport. So at that time, I came back to the apartment. As I came back, I saw David Berkowitz's car park on North Broadway, which is like the main thoroughfare that runs between like, through Yonkers and so on.
How'd you know it was his car?
Okay, because like I told you, Officer Chamberlain, he gave me the description of his car, his license plate number. So I immediately recognized it. So I parked my car in the parking lot. And this is like right on the corner of where my wife lived, because it was like a whole block unit of row houses here.
Mm-hmm.
So I took the dog for a walk. My wife and I had a dog, and I took the dog out for a walk to just look innocent about it. And as I looked into the car, on the passenger side in the front, there was like a yellow notepad about this size, and there was like 4 lines of writing in the first 4 lines. I can't remember what it said, but the only thing I remember is the word "you," and the way he makes his "yous" are very distinctive. And I couldn't believe it. So I went back to the apartment. I immediately called up the investigator from my department. And I said, I can believe this. He's got a notepad right on the floor of his car. And the writings are similar. I mean, if you get a handwriting analyst to check it, it's going to be it. He says, well, there's nothing we can do about it. He says, if we pull him in, he's going to say that somebody put the notepad in his car and then it had nothing to do with him. So, more frustration. So, that night, when I was working for the Sheriff's Department that particular day, that night when we got back to headquarters, we ran a license plate check on Berkowitz, on his license. I don't know if you probably have a copy of this.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And at that point, he had the failure to answer a summons in the beginning of July, which means he was driving with a suspended license, and if they wanted to pick him up for questioning, there was the perfect thing to do it with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But again, they did nothing. We presented this, and they did nothing about it.
Hey, yeah, what's up?
So,
Okay.
that night, we went up to Berkowitz's apartment because we stopped back at my apartment so I could get some more clean clothes. So I started work, the first day of work at Montefiore Hospital on Monday, that's the 8th of August. So when we went in there, we could hear Berkowitz upstairs. And we went up to his apartment door, but we didn't take any action. We just listened. He was talking, matter of fact, I could hear him. He was talking to himself. I know he was talking to himself, but I heard him talking. It wasn't a radio, it wasn't a television. It was, a voice.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's what?
we just,
What
left
was that?
after that. We didn't take any action.
Uh-huh.
There were
Yeah,
4
we
of
got
us. So the next day I brought my letters up to the Sheriff's Department, these 2 letters I showed you. They dusted them for
And
prints,
I'm trying to see,
and at that time, I don't think they got any prints
it
off
was his mother.
either of them.
His mother. Yeah.
So,
And, but the vet.
at that time I had the conversation about, yes, this must be him, and he said, no, it's not, we have somebody else who fits him criminally and looks like the
That
composite.
references to a,
But he never told me who that particular
Hold on.
person was. So at that time, they said, well, we'll cross-reference these letters, because I spoke to Detective Lorenzo, in Yonkers, we'll cross-reference these to the FBI, so they can check.
Yeah, Pontiac.
So that kind of ended it there, and I got permission from the sheriff to check Berkowitz, to just keep an eye on him, follow his movements, his car, what was going on.
No,
So I would check it every day, see where his car was. On
that's the only.
Monday night, his car was parked like maybe 100 feet away from the building itself on Pine Street, south on Pine Street. And in the car, on the front floor, was like a whole bunch of magazines and some papers, and he had a big blue jacket in the back seat, a duffel bag that was flat on the seat, and a pair of jeans, I believe. And again, he was home that night. I could hear him walking around. I mean, it was like you could hear him turn on and off the light switch. It was, that evident. So, again, I was still staying at my wife's apartment. Went back up there. My wife said, get out. She said, if this guy's after you, he's going to come after you up here, and they're going to get me involved in this whole thing. So that, on Tuesday, I had to move back to my apartment.
So they
So
dropped him there.
on Tuesday again, I came back to my apartment and I went out and checked Berkowitz's car. It was parked like a little closer to the building this time, except there were no jeans, no
They took
jacket.
him off the active.
There were just a couple of magazines on the floor, and that was
Because that's
it.
when they found out that he was in the army.
So again, you know, there was really no movement on his part, and I think he was home that night.
Yeah, I know, the records reflect that he...
Wednesday morning,
That he resigned at 7:03.
I was on my way to work. I left the house at 7:25 in the morning.
Very good.
Went down Pine Street, got out to North Broadway, and I decided, well, I'll take a shortcut, go over High Street down Park Avenue to go to Ashburton Avenue. And as I did such, as I got across Palisades Avenue, went to High Street,
Yeah.
there was the car, Berkowitz's car. Again, from the description and the license
But he
plate,
was definitely...
I could see it was his, so I slowly came up
It was a career, I think.
by it, and as I drove by, this was the first time I got my look at Berkowitz. He was sitting there kind of like leaning across the front seat towards the passenger side. And as I started to drive by, he kind of like leaned over like this and just watched me as I went by. So I said, wow, the guy's gonna probably start tailing me. So I watched my rearview mirror most of the way down to the Bronx, to the hospital. And I get, you know, he didn't tail me, at least I didn't see him tail me.
Uh-huh.
So I really thought nothing about it the rest of the day. When I came home that night, I didn't know at that time that New York City had him staked out. They'd been up to Yonkers on Tuesday. They related all my stories to Strano and the rest of them. And so I came home. I didn't even notice what was going on. I just saw some people standing by a fence. And I guess they'd been out there all day and they were watching what was going on. So I drove past the front of the building. I saw Berkowitz's car parked like just like north of the building, maybe 75 to 100 feet north of the building. So I decided, well, I'll go out. It was drizzling, so I'll go out later on. I'll check,
I don't know.
see what's
I don't
going
know
on
what
with
they
the
mean by
car.
inquiries. Does that mean by inquiries telephone?
So I went up to the apartment. I went to sleep for a while. I got a phone call from my sister's father-in-law. Kept me on the phone for about an hour and a half. So about 7:30, I went down to do my laundry.
Could be people in person.
And about 8 o'clock, I switched over for my clothes
Could
from
be
the,
Yonkers.
you know, the washer to the dryer. I decided, well, I looked out the door and it wasn't raining anymore, it was drizzling. So I went upstairs and I went outside. I looked at Berkowitz's car. On the front seat, on the passenger side on the floor,
Well,
it was like a white envelope,
probably for the same reason.
and there was a letter in it. I think it was on a yellow sheet of paper
A
or
lot of
something.
pressure from
On the back seat,
the press.
there was a duffel bag, and you could see a gun butt. You know, the outline of a gun butt.
A rifle or a pistol?
No, gun butt.
Yeah,
You know, some type of rifle, shotgun, rifle, whatever, which ended up being like an automatic weapon, a semi-automatic weapon. So I started to walk away from the car. I was going to go upstairs and call my department and see if I could get somebody over there and we'd tail them. So as I started to walk back to the building, I heard a lot of running. So immediately I knew that somebody had staked
I
out.
felt that Mitch.
So as I got to the front of the building, 35 Pine Street, I was surrounded by plainclothes officers. At that time, they didn't identify themselves as New York City police officers. They surrounded me, and as a matter of fact, it was Ed Zigo who said to me, he says, "Are you David Berkowitz?"
Yeah.
And I looked at him, I laughed, and I said, "No," and I took my identification out of my pocket, and I showed him my shield and my identification. And, you know, he said, you know, well, why were you looking in the car? And he said,
Okay, good.
wait a minute, he had seen, it was a Yonkers patrol car, the guy lives in the building, parked his car, and he went in for dinner. He said, call up Yonkers PD and tell them to get that car the fuck the hell out of here. He said, we don't want to spook them. So one of the guys left, and I guess they made a phone call, and then he said, well, let's go walk down the end of the block on the hill so nobody will see us and we can talk. So then we all walked down around, and I explained my situation to them, but at no time did they ever tell me they were from New York City.
And
I kept thinking that it was Yonkers that was doing it.
gave me the name of Michael.
So at that time, Zigo, and 5 or 6 other whoever, at that time, like I said, the other officers left. They said they were going to get the warrants. That time they told me not to go near Berkowitz or his apartment or his car. So I said, well, I'm doing my laundry. You know, I don't care. You can get and do what you want. So I went back, and as I went back down to the laundry room to take my laundry out, I thought to myself, they had men only on the roof and sitting out in the car on Pine Street. And there were like 4 or 5 different ways. If Berkowitz found out they were staking him out, he could have left the building and they would have never even known he was going. Matter of fact, they even asked me if he was in his apartment at the time, which he was. And at that time, I went back upstairs, and sitting in the unmarked car outside was Jardella and Polatico. And I told Jardella about the situation. He said, well, show me. I took him into the building and I showed him the 3 or 4 different exits that
I don't know.
Berkowitz could have taken, they would never
You
seen
think it's
him.
done
He says, all right, he says, do me a favor, you stake it out for me right now, and let me see if I can get more manpower down here. I said, all right, no problem, I have my gun with me.
There you were.
Go ahead. So he left, about 10, 15 minutes later, came back, and says, listen, I spoke to him, and he said, we don't need, this area staked out, we feel that he's a loner.
Could be.
He doesn't know what's going on, he's on the riverside, we're out here, we don't think he's,
Yeah,
going to be aware of what's going on. I said, okay, it's fine with me. He says, well, would you do me a favor? They asked me, would you please come up and sit with us? He said, you've seen what Berkowitz looked like, we don't know what he looks like. Would you come up and sit with us, in the car? And I said, yeah, sure, but I have to get clearance from my department.
They're,
And he says, no problem. He says, but do me a favor. He says, don't tell him
No.
what it's
I'm
about,
on the phone with her for about 7:30.
and don't ask anybody else to come down.
Her, George, and Sam.
So I said, okay, fine. So I went upstairs, I called the captain of my department, got the clearance, told us to make sure they had backup. I said, yeah, they got backup.
To come here around.
So at that point, I went downstairs, I could hear Berkowitz, he was still in his apartment, this was about 8:30, that I went downstairs to sit in a marked car.
Okay, but see, the pump house that I saw you were talking about, you're talking about another pump house. And the pump house, see where all those crosses were in that cave, if you will.
Right, that is under the artificial reflecting pool at Untermeyer's. That's where our people took pictures.
Under the artificial reflecting pool.
Right. There's a pool in Untermeyer's Park that's raised up like. Apparently, the pool is level with